Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi, everyone. Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. I'm doing a lot of recording, doing some recording today, so I'm really glad to have Eric Wolf of Ovo Control with us today. But before we get to him, just a reminder, do ring the bell and subscribe to the channel. Do tell us if what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Thoughts, comments, yes, even criticisms, you can get out, send that out to me. I would like to hear from it. Today we have a guest. Eric Wolf is the CEO of Inalytics LLC. He is the founder of this particular company that started in 2003, and this is birth control for pigeons. So if you're wanting a non-lethal method of controlling pigeons, and maybe some of your clients are interested in that, he's going to talk about this particular birth control product for pigeons. And you can learn more, of course, at ovocontrol.com. And we're going to go kind of do a deep dive into this particular product that can help people resolve some of their problems with pigeons according to their ethical standards. Mr. Wolf, glad to have you on board here on Living the Wildlife.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate the introduction.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into starting this company with Inalytics?
Well, there was the active ingredient we work with is something called nicarbazine, and it has a long history going back 65 years or so. It was originally developed by Merck, the pharmaceutical company,
Okay.
for use in chickens. And its use and so it goes back early 1950s, 1953, I believe. It was originally put on the market, and it was back in the day, Stephen, where chickens were, you didn't buy chicken at Costco or Ralph's or Vons or Albertsons, anything like that. Chicken came from the farm,
Right.
and it was a Sunday meal. It wasn't an everyday meal. It was a special meal. Okay. And the farmer went around the back and got himself an old egg layer,
Right.
and took its head off and threw it in a pot for a day of cooking to get it tender enough to eat. So clearly times changed, and
Right.
the vertical integration of the poultry industry is well known, and that vertical integration took a number of steps, number of milestones and innovations along the way that made it possible to grow 10,000 chickens in a chicken house in a matter of 35 days. So that's all the longer it takes to grow a chicken from day-old chick to adult chicken that goes, 2.5 what is it, 2.5 kilos, something like that.
Okay.
And it goes to the chicken house or
So
chicken slaughter plant.
about 6
And
pounds then, right?
yeah,
Thereabouts. 6, 7 pounds.
live weight, correct.
Yeah.
And it takes it takes a very short time, just like
That's
pigeons.
amazing.
They
Yeah.
grow very quickly as well. It seems like they fledge over the weekend. At any rate, so along the way, there were certain innovations, and this active ingredient, nicarbazine, was one of those. Back in the day, if you put too many chickens together, they would all get a disease called coccidiosis. So coccidiosis is an enteric disease. It affects the digestive system, and if left uncontrolled, you can lose half your chickens overnight.
Mm,
They get bloody diarrhea, and then you got a bunch of dead chickens. The chickens are most sensitive when they're young. And if you're in animal husbandry, you know coccidiosis, because any animal that eats from the ground is subject to coccidiosis, this infection of coccidia. It's a parasite, um,
okay.
and infects the inside of the digestive tract. And sheep get it, dogs get it, pigs get it. Uh, literally anything can get it that eats from the ground. Even your kids can get it. They go in a sandbox and eat protozoa, and they end up with a protozoal infection called coccidiosis.
Okay.
And this thing was prior to the innovations like nicarbazine. There was no stopping this. There was nothing to prevent the disease, and this was the innovation by Merck back 65 years ago, was one of many. And today, if you look on the market, there are an entire array of what are called coccidiostats, drugs that prevent or control coccidial infections in chickens. Interesting to note that nicarbazine is still used by the carload in the world of industrial chicken production. So if
No
you eat
kidding.
chicken, rest assured that your chicken has probably seen some nicarbazine during its lifetime.
No kidding.
I mean, the material is in literally all the poultry integrators across the, it's a very short list of Tyson, Purdue, Foster Farms, who else is there back on the southeastern coast, and
Yeah.
the different
Yeah. Tyson's the big one. There was no doubt about
Tyson.
that. Yeah.
Tyson's very obviously
Very
very
big.
large, but there are others that are large as well. I believe there's about seven of them. At
Okay.
any rate, they all use nicarbazine to prevent the coccidial disease in their chickens. Now, early on, when this stuff was being first got wider and wider use, there was no industry per se. So the concept of large scale chicken production didn't really exist. You couldn't do it. And then along came these kinds of products, as well as vaccines and other technologies that allowed the producer to put together a lot of chickens in the same place. One of the effects, the side effects of nicarbazine in chickens, was that if fed to broiler breeders, these are the chickens that lay the eggs that become the day-old chicks that you make broilers out of. But it's a separate population. They're called breeders. And as the name implies, they just breed. They lay eggs every day, just like an egg-laying chicken would, but they're fertilized. So the
Mm,
breeders are kept together with roosters, and they make the day-old chicks. And of course, over time, another innovation, technological innovation, was genetics. So the chickens are bred for this ability to transform a pound and 1.7 pounds of feed into a pound of meat. So they're incredibly efficient converters of feed to meat. So not only do they grow fast, they grow very efficiently. And genetics plays the largest role in that conversion.
mm,
Uh, but they learned early on, Steve, that if you get this drug into the broiler breeder feed, into the breeder ration, all of a sudden the eggs will stop hatching. So
right.
you you feed it to them in error,
Right.
And of course, back in the day, it was much easier to do errors than it is today.
Crazy.
Today, they have separate mills that
Right.
are dedicated to breeder feed, and nothing else goes into that, in or out of that particular plant, with the exception of the trucks that supply the breeder houses with feed and that kind of thing. So they've eliminated much of the errors that happen, misfeedings,
Right.
but you can get an effect with nicarbazine just through cross contamination, and that back in the day, when feed mills were making everything from horse feed, cattle feed, chicken feed, dairy feed, you'd have one batch after another going through there, and you had quite a lot of cross contamination. So you make a broiler feed, and then you follow it with a breeder feed. And if you had nicarbazine in the broiler feed, you'd end up with some cross contamination. And
So
as
it didn't take very much to stop that refertility. So I'm assuming there would be. So we're talking about probably even micro doses that would
yeah, it's
it
parts per
causes
it's parts per million.
parts per million. Okay.
Okay, so um, what is it called? It's the level of
Effect.
sensitivity or something
Okay.
like that. It is down at 10 parts per million. So
Oh, wow.
if you're above 10 parts per million, you're going to have an effect. If you're below 10 parts per million, you're probably not going to have an effect.
Okay.
So the chicken people, of course, do whatever they possibly can to avoid any cross contamination or misfeedings or anything. Invariably, at least once a year, somebody will come along and say, "Oops, we got some nicarbazine into the breeder feed." They'll look in their incubators and they'll open them up, and instead of hearing peep 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 peep, they hear nothing.
Nothing. Nothing.
So it is, if you get a full dose, not 10 ppm, but if you get a full dose of 125 ppm nicarbazine into a breeder ration, nothing is hatching anymore.
Right.
I mean, it just turns off uh, uh, the fertility of those eggs. And so for 65 years or so, the Merck salesman would run around the countryside and tell all the poultry integrators, great product to use for chickens, but whatever you do,
Don't get
don't
it in your
get it
breeders.
into your breeder feed.
So
So
who decided to test it on pigeons?
that was us.
Oh, that was you. So
That's
what gave you the
what,
idea to thought, well, let's try this on
Steve,
pigeons?
we are not the first people
Okay.
to ever think of this idea.
All right.
It's been around for 65 years.
Okay.
People thought, wow, this would be a pretty interesting idea to control pest birds, non-lethal way of, instead of using a toxicant,
Right.
let's use this and stop them from breeding and just run the population down through attrition.
Mm,
Well, they invariably, everybody that thought of that idea ran into significant problems. They couldn't get it to work. So you would think something that you fed with a chicken and you had this kind of profound effect in a chicken, that you'd have the same profound effect in a starling or a pigeon. And
right.
sorry, it's just not true. So it was tried by multiple investigators over the years, and I can dig out the citations for you.
Right.
There was a guy that ran probe studies at University of Missouri. There was a guy at the University of Jerusalem that ran studies. The Italians ran studies. A bunch of different people, and they all came to the same conclusion: no effect.
And what was the problem? Why
Well,
wouldn't it affect on pigeons?
the, my my partner, who's a chemist, uh, uh, an organic chemist, and he spent most of his career at Roche Labs.
Hmm.
He said this is impossible. You can't have this kind of profound effect in chickens and not have it in other species. the issue must be that they're not absorbing it. So we
Oh,
took
okay.
we took a different tact on formulation. What they did in the past was just use uh, nicarbazine, either technical grade nicarbazine 100% or a premix. The commercial premix that's sold in the poultry industry is 25%. And to get the right dose, you add a pound per ton of feed.
Right.
It's as easy as that. Um, but my partner indicated that he just didn't believe this, and so he started fiddling with the formulation and how to get it uh, into pigeons. And well, we didn't actually start with pigeons. We started with geese.
Okay.
We started with Canada geese was our first development, and the reason we started with geese is that there was so much support for it at the time
Yeah.
from USDA, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, from the different animal welfare groups. They all thought that this was the what do they call it, the golden grail
Yeah,
of
Holy Grail. Yeah,
holy
or the
grail,
silver bullet.
yeah, of wildlife control. And um, we went through the development phase and eventually got a product, and we brought it to EPA, who had never registered or even maybe they did review something previously that sterilized animals, but this was the first time they looked at one that contracepted
Mm,
a wildlife species, and it was Canada goose.
okay.
And while all these organizations started out very supportive, over time they they grew less supportive. The um, and we have a publication on it I can send you, but it's called the Political and Social Barriers to Entry for Wildlife Contraception or something
Was
like
that in
that.
the Vertebrate Pest Conference proceedings?
It is, yes, it should be in there. It's also published in zoo veterinary
Oh, okay.
something.
Yep.
I can send you copies, no problem. But it describes all the different barriers and hurdles we encountered. So after a while, it was the hunting lobby didn't like the idea of contraceptives being developed for wildlife because they thought, my gosh, if this is successful in geese, eventually they'll start using it in deer.
Right.
God forbid. So,
Sure.
and in fact, over time, that has occurred. There's been several innovations for contraceptive use in deer and other ungulates. I mean, they use
Not with nicarbazine or
no, 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 no,
PGP,
no.
right? So, yeah.
Sorry, not with nicar. I got off
Right.
track. It's
Okay.
not with
You're
nicarbazine.
just talking about the concept
The
of birth control.
concept of
Right.
of trying to manage a
Right.
population with contraception as opposed to conventional methods.
Right.
Um, but yeah, nicarbazine only affect. We've exhaustively tested it. It only affects stuff with feathers that lays eggs. So unless you have feathers and lay eggs, this
That's
stuff is not having any effect, contraceptive or otherwise.
right. Right.
So
Okay.
to mammals, I mean, rats can get fat on it, but they're not going to be contracepted.
So your product, so somehow your company was able to figure out how to formulate this product to give the geese and ultimately pigeons enough a dose to interfere with their fertility.
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
So is that now does it only work on the female side? It doesn't work on the male side, right?
That's correct.
It's just a female side.
Yeah,
Okay.
the science behind this is that just like in mammals, on the coating of the egg, there's a ZP3 protein,
Okay.
sperm receptor.
Yeah.
And that's where nicarbazine, or actually a piece of nicarbazine, has its effect in binding that or damaging that in such a way that the sperm can no longer attach to the egg.
Ah, okay. So
So
it's a, all
that's
right.
where it's working. For the technical explanation, it says, as with so many of these things, contraceptives for wildlife.
So it's a
Most,
true contraceptive. It doesn't allow the fertilization of the egg, period.
yeah,
So it's not
there's
even an
no
abortion. It's not even an abortion event.
no
Okay.
there's no if you take a bunch of pigeons and treat them with Ovo Control and pull out one of the eggs a week later, you can open it up and it looks like a chicken egg that you buy
Okay.
at the grocery store. So there's no
Wow.
embryo in there, nothing's developing. There has been no fertilization.
So how much does a pigeon or a female pigeon in this case, how much does she have to eat before she loses her fertility?
All right,
So
so it's relatively straightforward. The metric is a pound per 80 birds per day, or 5 grams per bird. You're
bird.
talking a half a kilo of Ovo Control for 100 pigeons.
Okay.
We try to uh, express that to customers and users, is just keep that metric a pound per 80 birds per day, and that during the breeding season. So in Montana, for
Right.
example, you can probably take the winter off because no pigeon in their right mind is having a
Yeah,
it's
we're -9 where I'm at today. So
so
yeah,
pigeon
so
doesn't.
and how does it, so in light of, and I think that's important because I think there's been obviously when a wildlife control operator is thinking about, so they have a client who has pigeon problems, they've seen the price of what it would cost maybe to do an exclusion, and they're like that they might have gotten the sticker shock from that,
Right.
and then they of course maybe there's political reasons why they don't want to have some lethal control done. And so they're like, okay, but we still need to do something. What can we do? So they're like, okay, let's try this birth control for pigeons. And how long do they, how do they know? Like, for example, when they're looking at the price to give that person for a year, how do they know when the pigeons are raising young in that particular environment? I would assume in the southern states it's year round, but how do we find that tipping point for those of us in the northern tier of the
Yeah,
country?
in the northern tier, you can certainly take the coldest winter months off.
Yeah.
There is, as you know, there is seasonality in pigeon breeding,
Okay.
especially in the colder climates. They need warmth to breed. And that's one of the reasons why they just love power plants and gasification facilities and
Mhm.
uh,
Do you have an idea of what that temperature might be? That sort of minimum temperature they would need ambient to breed?
you
Is
know,
that in the 70s?
I no, it doesn't have to be that high. You're going
Okay.
to have, the temperature is going to fluctuate during the day. I think the
Right.
minimum, or as low as you can go and still hope to have a pigeon egg hatch, is probably around freezing.
Around
If
freezing.
it's
Okay.
if it's going below freezing, unless, I mean, there's caveats to this, Stephen.
Right.
I've
Right.
been in Minneapolis in February and found nests with eggs in them. Well, invariably they're located under a heating duct in a
Right.
hot stove,
Okay.
for example,
Yeah. So if there's an exogenous source of heat for
of
that
heat.
particular, so
Yeah.
that's throwing it off. But for I mean, most of the jobs that I've looked at, not that I've looked at that many, there might have been heat from the building because they were against the building, but there was no heater underneath it or a light that was providing a source of heat. And it was almost as cold next to the building as it was out
Oh
away from
yeah,
the
no,
building.
you got it. And pigeons, for the most part, they're going to nest inside. They want the protection of uh, a roof, some sort of
Right.
cover on them, so they have protection from the elements and from predators that are gonna want to get in there. So they do like, and gosh, so many of our customers are heat producing industrial facilities.
Oh,
So
okay. All right.
think think glass, paper, pulp, forging, you know, mills, steel, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they're warm all year round. So if you're making as a pest or wildlife controller, if you're making this assessment, sure. In the example that you used early on about, a small community in Montana, yeah, you can take 3 months of the year off, no
Yeah.
problem. If, however, you have a power plant in that location where it's nice and warm in certain areas of the plant, they're going to be breeding. Um, and the cost, let's say, for example, that there's 50% less breeding in December than there is in June.
Mm,
All right, for a period of 3 months. Don't complicate things. Don't complicate the life of the pest controller or the wildlife controller and have him adjusting his baiting to accommodate that.
yeah.
Again, it depends on the customer. If you're in a plant environment where you have obvious heat sources, I would keep the thing going all year long. If
Sure.
you're in a urban area, if you're in even a place like what's a good example up in Montana?
Well, Billings,
Billings.
it's
I
our biggest city.
if you're out there treating the city of Billings, yeah, I would take 3 months off. I would just say, well, we're going to save ourselves the money of the bait during the winter time because most of your pigeons are not breeding.
So would you continue to feed them untreated grain to keep them
Yes,
attached to that
very.
particular
That's
site?
that's an excellent question, and the answer is yes.
Okay,
You condition them to that feeder. So the
right.
feeder, the automatic feeder that dispenses Ovo Control, it's a reconfigured deer feeder.
Mm,
It works exactly the same way. And if you've never used one, it'll take you about 5 minutes to learn how.
okay,
But you put that for deer, you put it out in the woods and you feed them twice a day. For pigeons, we like going on urban rooftops, but it doesn't necessarily have to go on a rooftop. Any kind of flat paved concrete surface will suffice. Um, but yeah, I'd like to keep them going in the winter. You dial them way back,
okay.
Stephen. So if I'm normally feeding, pick an easy number, a pound a day
Yeah.
of Ovo Control, I dial it back to a quarter pound a day
Oh,
of just cracked corn, or
okay.
even whole corn if you prefer. Either way, and the idea is just to keep the pigeons conditioned to coming to that restaurant every day, every morning, same time of day. They're supposed to show up for a free meal.
Right,
I
right.
mean, it's like feeding the homeless. If they know there's going to be a meal at 4 o'clock, that's when they show up.
They'll show up. And so right, congratulations. I understand you got your product as a general use product now, so it's no
Oh yeah.
longer restricted
Oh,
use.
it's
So
it hasn't been restricted use for more than 10 years.
yeah, so I was a little surprised when I saw that. I was like, oh, it's general use now, because originally when it came out, it
Yeah,
was restricted use.
right.
So let's talk about let's get down into the nitty gritty. So a wildlife control operator, pest control operator has a client who wants to explore this particular. So the ideal situation is, of course, the person has pigeons coming to their facility, and so what does the pest controller who is licensed to use this product, because usually you have to have a license to use a product on someone else's property. Make sure you follow the rules, folks. Just throwing it out. Contact your Department of Ag and get your licenses or whatever. But of course, those of you who have your own property, the rules are different. But we're talking primarily to commercial folks. So they would want ideally uh, an off the ground location to install the automatic feeder, and then they would need to estimate how many pigeons would be there. They'd probably visit a few days, take pictures, and try to how many pigeons are visiting the site, and then know that a pound a day takes care of 80 pigeons.
All right.
And so,
And like with everything, Steve, you got to do a site evaluation. You
yeah,
got to figure out. And when customers call me out of the blue and say, well, we got a pigeon problem, we want to use Ovo Control, one of my first questions is, well, how many pigeons do you have? Because it's a bait and
Yeah.
you got to feed it at a certain rate. And of course, nobody knows.
Right.
First thing they say is, well, I have no idea. So, you got to start asking some questions, or during the site visit, do your own evaluation. How many pigeons are we dealing with? Do we have 50 or 500?
How do you
Oh,
recommend that process to go? Do you recommend that they show up a couple times during the day to see different
yeah, you
loafing
can.
practices, or is there a
You
particular
can,
time you think is
you
best?
can. I like mornings when the birds are still there.
Okay.
That being said, I think it's important, again, depending on the nature of your customer, that you start talking with them to try to figure out together how many pigeons are we dealing with? Are there 50 or are there 500? Let's try to figure this out, because Ovo Control it has this dosing metric of, or application metric of, a pound per 80 birds per day. Do it too light, and it's not going to work as
Right.
well. Do it too heavy, and you're not going to hurt any birds, but you're just wasting costly
Wasting money.
bait. Uh, so try to get a fix. And Stephen, it doesn't have to be, certainly doesn't have to be exact.
Right. Right.
Uh, but if you have 200 birds, you don't want to be dosing for 100,
Right. Right.
I guess is my point.
And how do you recommend that count be done? So would you suggest taking some photos and then being
Hey,
able to go back and count a couple of
as you
times with
get,
a trail
as you,
camera and
yeah, as you get experience at it, you can start looking at flocks and making a pretty good educated guess. But in the
okay.
meantime, take some pictures with your cell phone. You don't need a trail cam
Yeah.
at this point. Take some pictures, different areas, walk it, talk to the customer. Where does he see the birds? How often does he see? Are we seeing birds every day? Are they coming at particular times of the day? Are they nesting there? It's a real basic question. Are the birds nesting there, or are we at a McDonald's site where the birds are coming in daily to sit and loaf on the roof in the sun?
Yeah.
So much of it, and when you do those site evaluations, is also when you're going to consider what tools are you going to use. For the McDonald's, where you got 100 birds congregating once a day to get some sun, Ovo Control, not the right choice. That's just, you need a repellent that's going to work for you, as opposed to an abatement tool. I mean, the manager of the McDonald's, of course, says, I want all the birds gone. Well, every customer wants the birds
Right.
gone today. Let's get rid of everything.
Right. Right.
Where's
Right.
your where is your magic wand, by the way?
Sure. Just
But Ovo Control is just another tool.
yeah.
It's an abatement tool. All right. So if you are at a site with too many pigeons and you need to abate the population, you basically have two choices. Uh, you can kill more, or you can stop them from reproducing.
Right.
So you kill more by trap, shoot, poison, the conventional methods of taking out pigeons. Unfortunately, those methods, unless you are doing them all the time, it's going to be a short-term effect.
Mm.
You need a unique set of conditions to be able to trap out enough pigeons to really make a long-term difference. Can you get them all?
Yeah. It
That's
would be
hard.
tough. It's tough. Typically, the rule that I was taught was 90%. If you're trapping, that's kind of the goal. You should be able to get 90%, but the 100% pretty. I'm sure some guys do it, but
There's,
that's a
there's,
bit hard. That
there's
last 10%.
especially if you're talking about larger pigeon populations.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had calls from customers um, that have, the recent one from a paper manufacturer up on the Lake Michigan somewhere, and He said, "Yeah, we did a census of the pigeons in our warehouse at the beginning of the summer, and there were 50 pigeons. And then we trapped all summer long and did a census again in September. And we had 100 pigeons in September." I said, "Well, how many did you trap?" "Well, we trapped 350.
Oh my gosh.
So, and that's not an anomaly. I've heard that story from
That's
many different
amazing.
people.
So that brings me to the next question, and that is clients, of course, are going to be afraid of if you're starting to feed, is that going to just simply cause more birds to visit the site, therefore increasing the cost of you need more product because of the luring effect of the birds. In your experience, does that how big of a fear, how big of a reality? Obviously, the fear is there whether it's real or not, but how
Yeah,
much of a
we
reality
get
is that a
we
problem
get
for
we
clients?
get some customers that will say, "Oh my gosh, a lot depends, Stephen, where you are.
Okay.
If I'm in downtown New York and I put up a feeder at one building, you and I both know you're going to attract every pigeon from the neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but pigeons are flocking birds. The flock represents a social unit. They like to go to their favorite feeding places all together. And we use that behavior. You set up a feeder, what I described before, of attracting the birds in first with pre-bait and then, wean them off the pre-bait and transition over to ovo control. Um, if you're at one of our typical commercial sites where ovo control would be deployed, and it's because of the feeder. The automatic feeder puts out a predetermined dose of ovo control. So it's not like when you use a bait pan and you put pre-bait in it. I mean, the whole concept is to attract as many birds as possible.
Right.
That's not our baiting protocol. So we have a flock of 80 birds. We're going to
Mhm.
put down a pound of bait. Put down 2 pounds of bait, and the 80 birds don't eat the bait, then you have the risk of attracting more birds in.
Right. Okay.
So don't put down more than you need. I mean, human nature being what it is, I mean, we all want to use, if it says use
More.
two
Yeah.
tablespoons, we
Yeah.
got to use four because it's twice as good. It's really critical with ovo control not to put it on too heavy. Just, try to get that in the zone where you're not over or underfeeding, and you're
So
not
you're
going to you're not
Yeah,
going to
so you're
attract other
pointing
birds.
out the importance of those initial days of inspection. You want to get a good handle on the number of birds arriving. And so therefore by targeting the volume of your bait to those birds, you don't have residue being another attractant for when those birds leave. Now other birds are going to be checking that out because
Yeah,
you're
and
only treating the birds that are there.
the initial site evaluation or the first couple of times you go there, you're trying to get a feel for the number of birds they got.
Right.
And I don't want to overemphasize that, or I don't want to underemphasize it
Yeah.
either. But you are going to determine exactly how many birds you got only after you put out a feeder.
Yeah.
Each feeder will accommodate roughly 150 birds. Once you have the birds conditioned to come into that feeder, and they're conditioned, Stephen, if the feeder is supposed to trigger at 6 a.m., quarter to six, the birds are
Birds are showing up.
flying around waiting to be fed. It's
Yeah.
no
Right.
it's no different with deer. They show up at the deer feeder, a half an hour before the thing triggers.
Yeah. They figure
So
it out. Yeah.
once they're conditioned and once they're hitting that feeder regularly, now either take a picture with your cell phone or use the trail camera and capture the image, and you take the image back to your computer. You print one out, you count heads. Now you got a and it's the same birds that show up at that feeder every day.
Right.
And if you don't believe that, just trap a few and band them, and let them go again. You'll see the banded birds coming
See
back
the
every
banded
day.
birds. How long of a time does what's like the mortality rate of birds? So when should the client start beginning to see a decline in the
The
numbers?
numbers, we typically get reports from users and customers that they're seeing something visually within about 3 months. All
Three
right,
months.
so pigeons breed like crazy. Okay, so it's two eggs per clutch up to six times a year. Not in Montana, but certainly in Arizona. So they're
Right.
prolific breeders. The good news is they got a short lifespan. So you're looking at a bird that actually fledges, and goes into reproduction 2 to 3 years. So, I have customers ask us all the time, so we have to wait 5 years till we see any effect? No. It goes down over time. It
Hmm.
doesn't happen one day to the next.
Right.
It's just natural attrition. You're waiting for the adult birds, the adolescent birds to grow up and die. And pigeons don't live long. I'll have people tell me, well, I had a pigeon that lived 15 years. It- That's certainly possible. I read in the literature a report of a pigeon that's lived 30 years, but those are anomalies, and they're not living in the great outdoors. Uh,
Right.
feral,
Someone's caring for that bird.
right? Feral cats are the same way. I mean, feral
Yeah.
cat lives 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
A house cat that gets proper nutrition, veterinary care, vaccines, and all the rest can live 20 years.
Right.
So yeah, pigeons are living too. So it's a short lifespan. And I'm certain in that population where I'm saying there's 2 to 3 year lifespan, there's probably ones in there that are living five. Okay, there's also ones in there that only live 6 months. And
Hmm.
the predation on those populations is also high. All of our raptors, I mean, it's a prey species, so the raptors are taking them out constantly. I think they provide a nice meal for an owl. Um, and I should add that if you get the question about secondary effects,
Sure. Talk about that.
there are none. You can just say nine, no secondary effects whatsoever. Either raptors or scavenge predators or scavengers, either one. They just can't eat enough.
Can't
Uh,
even, it's just too small. The bird's metabolizing too much of it. What about the crop? Does any of it stay treated grain in the crop? Oh, pigeons don't have a crop, do they?
yeah, they
So
yeah they do. Of
they
course they
do.
do. Yeah,
Okay.
and
So
and
is it
and,
possible
and
there
you're
could be
right.
some?
I remember having this question at a meeting with New York Department of Environmental Conservation,
Yeah.
and the lady said, "Well, the pigeon could have some of this ovo control in their crop, and then the peregrine falcon swoops down and eats the pigeon.
Right.
And not only does the falcon eat the good parts, the organs and the breast tissue, but they empty the crop out as well."
Okay.
Well, now the falcon has received a partial dose of ovo control.
Right.
So we said that pigeon, theoretically, it's a 5 gram dose. It's not enough to contracept the falcon.
Yeah.
Falcon weighs a kilo and a half. Uh, and they, not only that, Stephen, but you got to do it every day.
Right.
So each day, the pigeon would have to be harvested by the falcon at the same time of day, you know, in one day after the other, et cetera, et cetera. It's
Yeah.
just,
It's just not a.
yeah, I mean, could it happen? Sure.
Yeah.
Uh, is it likely to happen? Probably not in a million years. So,
Yeah. So no danger to dogs,
No, no,
cats, and anything. So the
no
mammals are
mammal.
even harder to treat with it because
Right.
of course we've probably consumed some ourselves as residue inside of the
Chicken.
chickens and what have you. So that's amazing. So let's talk about some strategies. So how would you recommend a wildlife control operator, the pest control operator? How would they what would be some things they would say to some objections that you've heard? How would they respond on the sales side to client questions, client objections, if we can use that term? What are some things that would help them become comfortable with it? Like, yeah, I need to use a contraceptive. They like the idea, but they're nervous, right? So how do you help that pest
Wow.
control operator
The
close the sale?
first thing for the WCO, and less so for the PCO, is that you need a pesticide license.
Right. Everyone
So,
got that? You got to have your license. Okay.
so you're licensed then to use a pesticide, and I believe most states have that requirement that if
Yeah, I
you're going to
think
do
all of them do. Yep.
pest control for hire, you're going to
hmm
use a pesticide, you got to have a pesticide license. Okay, that's clear. And I know that's a big hurdle for many of the wildlife control people.
More
But
are starting to listen and starting to get that licensed.
I hear that as well.
There's a lot more commingling between the two branches. So,
Agreed.
but
Agreed.
you're right. For some states, it is harder than others, to be sure.
Right. So, objections and objection handling. I would say that the biggest thing with ovo control is that the there's nothing immediate and there's nothing tangible.
Mm.
So how do I know it's working if I can't count any corpses? If I don't have any dead pigeons to pick up, can't possibly be working. And it's it's so in that respect, it's almost like life insurance, Stephen. You know, it, it's the
Okay.
same.
Yeah.
So, I'll have, customers will be cautious. They'll be, they don't want to believe that a contraceptive can do the job. They want something more potent. I mean,
Mm.
I look at the people that are working with rodent contraceptives now,
Yeah.
as opposed to rodenticides for rats. Gosh, that is a much harder hill to climb. Uh, I mean, everybody hates rats.
Yeah. But I think they're starting to get some traction
Yeah,
with,
yes,
uh, they're doing some things where they're mixing both rodenticides and
yeah,
the
yeah,
oval in their contraceptive, and that's where what I what about the suggestion for someone who wants that sort of immediate gratification of reduction,
yeah. I
where
mean,
the
it's not
wildlife control operator says,
Stephen.
well, why don't we do some
Stephen, it's
trapping first, and then we can
yeah,
follow up with the ovo control.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, again, going back to my basic equation of control strategies, you either got to, if you're not going to exclude,
Right. Right.
if you can't physically exclude the birds, and that's one of the first questions you got to ask yourself
Yeah.
at any site. Can I exclude the birds here in a cost-effective way?
Yeah. And sometimes you can't.
And
It's just too
and
expensive.
you know the people in the exclusion business will tell you, we can exclude anything. Well, it's true,
Yep.
but can you do it, without the guy falling over with a stroke when he hears the
It's
price tag?
Yeah,
So
it could be pretty pricey at times, to be sure. Oh
so
yeah,
you have to look at that. Um, our our technology will not drive the pigeon population to zero.
mm,
So it's another question, if you have a customer that has a requirement, for zero pigeons in a certain area, your selection of tools is even more limited.
right,
Ovo
right.
control will drive the population down to 5 to 10% of its starting point. You
Yeah.
got 100 pigeons after a few seasons, depending on environmental conditions and a lot of other factors, you'll have 5 or 10. And you got to keep, you should keep dosing, applying ovo control in a small way continuously. Don't we've had so many customers quit on us. Somebody new comes in
Yeah.
to management, warehouse manager comes in. What are we doing this for? Get rid of this stuff. So they stopped doing it, and a year or two later,
Yep.
we get another phone call. Can you send us some more bags of Ovo Control because we got the pigeons? I mean, it's like uh, taking the rat out of the Chinese restaurant, and then
Yeah.
you get fired because you got rid of all the rats.
Got rid of all the rats.
But what
Yeah.
you asked before about combining strategies, you're absolutely correct.
Right.
You can combine the best of both worlds. We always recommend, depends on your customer again. Customer's jumping up and down. He wants to see something tangible by next week. Well, you got to trap out whatever you can trap out, but simultaneously for the longer term and to keep them from coming back so fast,
Yeah.
uh, recommend an Ovo Control program and start that thing up so that they aren't bouncing right back. I'll
Mhm.
get companies that do a lot of trapping and they say, well, you know, we keep getting paid by trapping pigeons. I said, okay, but you can get paid the same thing for
Right.
contracepting them
With a lot less work because the automatic feeder's doing the work for you.
for ton, a
Yeah.
ton less money.
Yeah.
I frankly, talking to pest controllers and what they spend on trapping programs, it's just remarkable that you can charge enough to
Yeah.
recover your
It's
costs.
such a labor intensive because just the travel to and from, if you're checking daily, and some
Hell,
states
even
are a little bit more liberal than others, but
there are precious few that'll check daily. They'll get the customer to go up and check
yeah,
the traps and then call them if there's something in it. But trapping has its own, especially pigeons, has its own set of problems.
sure.
You got people that'll tamper with the traps. You got predators that'll sneak into a trap for a good meal. Uh,
That certainly happens.
then
Yeah.
you got the we all think that's fun, but until you have to take a hawk out
Yeah.
and ensure that it doesn't get hurt.
Right. Yeah.
So and then there's the labor intensive nature of it. The trap checks, the trucks, the technicians. Now you got the pigeons. You got to take them to the dump. Blah blah blah. So,
Yeah. And
to me, I'd
does
rather.
Ovo Control work in any other species? I mean, we had Canada geese, but that product's no longer available now, right?
Correct.
And so you have Ovo Control P, which is for
Yeah,
pigeons. Have you dropped the P now?
no, it's
No,
the product is Ovo Control P.
P.
It has a long list of pest birds on the label.
Okay, so it's more. Can you list some of those other species?
Well,
Just
it's all the common pest species, the blackbird, the mina, the
Minas,
grackles,
grackles. Okay.
starlings. The only thing that's not on there is a house sparrow because the bait particle size is just too big for
Too
house.
big. So not house sparrows. But you also don't get the same flocking levels with house
Correct.
sparrows as you would with
They
other.
right, and they tend to, they graze it, or they're grazers instead of gluttonous
Hmm,
feeders. You
okay.
know, and the biggest problem you get with a house sparrow is you get five of them in a big box store.
Yeah.
Now what do you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
You got to get them out, but Ovo Control's not the
Not the
it's
solution for that.
just not the right tool for. So I mean, I had an inquiry this morning for somebody that wanted to use Ovo Control on their pigeons that were under the solar panels, and I said that's not the right tool. If you got solar panels and you got pigeons underneath them, you have to use wire mesh
Yeah.
and surround that solar array and keep the pigeons out.
Right.
There is no other option.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, people talk to me about spike strips and stuff in that kind of circumstances. I guess, but
Sure.
where I've
Yeah.
seen it work best is so, again, assess, evaluate your customer. We have a graphic, and I can send that to you, Stephen, if you're
Hmm.
interested,
Sure.
of low, medium, and high opportunities.
Okay.
So low hanging fruit. the medium stuff. So low-hanging fruit would be any kind of manufacturing facility, prisons, industrial facilities, power plants, oil refineries, anything along those lines. Big, where you would come to the outside and say, well, we're going to net this operation. I said, no, you're
Yeah,
not.
no, you're not. Yeah. So
Okay.
things like power plants, you said, oil refineries, major processing type
Yeah.
facilities, areas
Yeah.
that are large scale, where you're just not going to be able to
Net it.
exclude that entirely, and the flocks are different places, and it's just too
The other piece of this thing, I mean, you can go into Amazon distribution center, and you could net the entire ceiling. I don't know how big they are, but I know they're massive.
yeah, yeah,
But you net it, and where do the pigeons go then?
right.
They're probably not leaving the Amazon property. Yeah, they like it there for whatever reason. Yeah, they're not nesting in the rafters anymore, but they're nesting somewhere else.
Sure.
So you can use Ovo Control along with literally any kind of other pigeon control strategy.
Right. Now, what
The
about areas if the birds are feeding somewhere else and coming to your facility to loaf? Is there a way to, and someone's like, I don't want to do exclusion, I don't want trapping, they're just dedicated to do a non-lethal control method. Can you get those pigeons to start feeding? Have you seen that been successful, or does that just take some real time to get them conditioned to
it's
stop feeding over there and to start feeding where they're loafing?
Yeah, that's a challenge,
Okay.
I would think. If I'm the customer and I have pigeons loafing at my facility, they're just sitting on the edge of the roof or
Yeah.
wherever, and they're just there taking in the sun. Um, I'm looking more at a repelling strategy
Okay.
than I am at an abatement strategy.
So your ideal situation is where they're nesting and residing for extensive periods of time,
Yeah,
or
I mean,
feeding, or feeding
pigeons
there.
pigeons have really powerful nest fidelity.
Okay.
So once they nest somewhere, Stephen, successfully, that they have a
Mhm.
successful nest, you basically have them for life. They pair up for life, and a nesting pair. One of them that loses a mate is gonna,
Mhm.
get somebody else to hang out with. But yeah, they're going to be nesting there for life. So once a nest is established, you've got them. Yeah, we look for, and gosh, the predominant numbers of our customers, we have nesting pigeons. I mean, it's one of the first questions I always ask, and frankly, I don't think we get calls from people that just have loafing pigeons.
Okay.
They figure out some sort of dispersal solution, repellent strategy to keep the pigeons from stopping there. I mean, it's like starlings at power plants.
Mhm.
I asked the customer, well, do you see them coming in seasonally? Oh yeah. Once it gets cold,
Right.
the starlings come in
Right.
to warm up. I said,
Yep.
well, it's not an ovo control candidate
Yeah.
because they're not nesting or breeding there.
Yeah.
It is pointless to give them ovo control. Give them an incentive to keep migrating. So you're going to use noise, you're going to use lights, you're going to use hoses,
Mhm. Yep.
spray them with power washers or whatever you can use to annoy them enough to make them or to encourage them to move on.
Okay.
You were asking about the objections before, and I didn't
Mm.
finish answering that. If I had to guess, the biggest objection is that there's no immediate
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah.
You have to wait. And as as human beings, I'm not even say this is an American trait. As human beings, we don't want to wait.
Right.
I
Right.
want the birds gone now. Well, if you want them gone now, it's either put up a net or trap, shoot, or poison. No, I can't. We can't be trapping the birds. We certainly can't be poisoning or shooting them. I mean, you can, but
Well, I mean, there might be political or sometimes some corporations have policies against that, but that's an important point. So that means the wildlife control operator, the pest management professional needs to be sure he has that, you know, come to Jesus moment with the client and realize that these are the limitations of the product. You have to make sure we're in this for the long haul. This isn't going to be,
yeah,
this. And so they need to be, and that's important because sometimes the desire to convert the sale gets a bad customer because you didn't properly qualify that customer. Are they really interested in that,
yeah, you got to.
So that's
There's no
important.
question. You got to set expectations.
Yeah.
Um,
In
with
writing, hopefully, so they don't forget.
uh,
Memories are fickle.
yeah, no, I understand, but at companies in the United States, modern companies, with 50 or more employees,
Yeah.
a plant site, they're going to have a big sign at the door, no guns.
Right.
So, I've talked to the people at ADM, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, well, we have wildlife services come in and shoot them over the weekend. I said, well, how's that working? Well, it doesn't, because they can only shoot a small portion of the population,
Right.
and the others just breed right
I,
back again.
or yeah, or they fly. Yeah, they fly away. You're able to kill some, and then they'll fly back in. And so yeah, it's certainly bird control. So this is an important. We have another tool in the toolbox, and so we want to make sure that the wildlife control operators, pest management professionals. One of my pet peeves is it's important for us not to say no. So if you have a client who says I don't want to use lethal control, well, for the right situation, this is an option for
Yeah,
them that
yeah,
will fulfill that. Um,
don't argue with the customer.
yeah, so if this is important, and so the option, don't say no. Here's an option. Learn more about it. Where would they? Let's give them the URL again for where they can learn more about the product.
Well, if you want to
Uh,
read about it, it's of course is www.ovocontrol.com.
OvoControl.com, OVO
Dot com.
Control.com. It's just
Right.
that
And
spelled like it sounds.
there's telephone numbers on there, and there's you can message us however you prefer to communicate.
Mhm.
The product gets a lot of support. There's instructional videos on the website. It is really difficult to make a mistake with Ovo Control.
Yeah,
Okay, it's not like using a toxicant. You
yeah,
mix it up too hard or too strong, and you got a whole bunch of dead birds.
right, right.
If you feed them too much, you're just wasting bait. But you're not going to hurt anything. You're not going to kill a dog. You're not going to have any kind of effect on a raptor or other predator. It's non-toxic. You can't. I mean, the
And
only way to kill a bird with Ovo Control is you take a 30-pound bag of it and drop it on the bird,
right, right.
and then the
So
bird's dead.
which is physical control. How
Right.
about the PPE? The PPE requirements for the products? It's just
Yeah,
gloves.
it's the standard stuff. Gloves,
Oh, long sleeve
long
shirt.
sleeve
Okay,
shirts. That's about the extent of it. And incidentally, it comes ready to use.
right. So no mixing.
There's no mixing required. You pour that, the feeder will hold probably 150 pounds of Ovo Control. Most people don't put anywhere near that much in it. They are using a bag or two at a time. Um, Pour it in the feeder.
So that would automatically feed. So let's just do a scenario here. So if there's 150 pounds in it and you have 80 birds, so that could go for 150 days at
Yeah,
a
you
pound a
could go
day.
right. You could go
You wouldn't
months
have to
that
go
way.
back and quote unquote
Yeah,
check it.
the only we recommend that you go and check the feeder, the automatic feeder once a month. So
Once a
just
month.
like with commercial pest control, the standard service interval is monthly, and we encourage our pest controllers and wildlife controllers to do that, to service it monthly, and to set that up with once it's operational.
Right.
You can't just throw a feeder up and expect it to do everything for you. We recommend it's a 3-2-1 program, so 3 visits the first month, 2 visits the second month, and once a month after that. So build that into your, when you're pricing these things, your customers. I find that the easiest way to price them, without having to do a lot of arithmetic on the back of the envelope, is just to use X dollars per feeder per month. Okay, Mr. Customer, you got 150 pigeons, so we're going to set up a feeder and we're going to charge you X dollars a month, include everything.
Given the simplicity, would it behoove some pest controllers to get their dealer's license and just simply sell it to the client and let them set it up? Or is that something, how hard is it to become a dealer?
We do not have a dealer network. Maybe we should. But I mean, if you wanted to, the last thing I guess we need in today's economic environment is to increase the distance between the manufacturer and the customer.
Okay.
We'd rather eliminate levels of distribution as opposed to increasing them. If you want to deal Ovo Control, I mean, that's possible too. We can, buy a pallet of the stuff and
You're a dealer.
You get a discount, and then when you resell it, you keep the discount for yourself.
Sure. And how long does it last in the bag
Oh
before the
gosh,
grain?
it's nicarbazine, the active ingredient, is remarkably stable.
And the grain itself, how durable is the
You
grain?
don't want to, and I think the label also includes instructions to keep out of water. If you put this, if you apply it to standing water, Stephen, it's like a cat food kibble. It'll turn to mush. And
So
not
got to
keep
dry, just like all your pesticides. Keep them dry.
Yeah, keep them dry. Storage conditions are clean and dry, free of any vermin and insects. So mice will get into, given the opportunity, mice will get into the stuff.
Oh, sure.
And so will rats, and even stored product pests will, if given the opportunity, the weevils will get into the stuff. If you store it in a warehouse that's infested with weevils, it'll get weevils as well.
Okay. And do you have any recommendations on the pre-bait? What's your magic food for the pre-bait that really gets them feeding?
The universal food we use is cracked corn.
Cracked corn.
And a lot of the pest controllers especially will say, well, we use whole corn. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason for whole corn is that pigeons can eat it and other little songbirds can't.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily, I mean, the incidence of non-targets at one of these feeders, once pigeons are conditioned to it, next to nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I can count on one hand, Stephen, the number of non-target reports we've had over the last 10 years.
That's amazing.
So well, for example, if you set up your feeder in an area that has many and copious competitive food sources, okay, you're probably going to attract non-targets. So if you put this stuff, if you put it up at a fish processing plant, where you got seagulls and pigeons galore, well, the seagulls are going to compete and probably win. But the good news is that it's not a toxicant. So if you get a mistake like that, you just stop, and the non-target birds return back to normal again within a week.
Within a week, okay.
So there's no permanent. It's truly a contraceptive. You stop giving it, It's the same thing for pigeons. If someone decides they want their pigeons to breed again,
Just stop.
stop.
Yeah,
They go right back to normal.
it's amazing. Well, anything more that we need to cover here that for our users that they should know about that we didn't cover in this? We covered a lot of different stuff here.
Yeah.
So is there anything we're missing that we want to be sure we get out there before
Oh,
we close up today?
there's probably some stuff I could go
Yeah,
on for hours on this topic.
sure. Well,
Uh,
we want to do the 80-20 principle,
yeah, no,
right? So the 20 that
I don't want to keep you for
sure.
or your viewers for hours. But
Okay.
yeah, I think we covered the high points,
All
Steve.
right.
I think we covered them well.
Well, I want to be sure that the viewer understands we've been talking to Eric Wolf of Ovo Control, and he's the CEO of Inalytics LLC, but you're probably going to remember the Ovo Control easier. That's OVO Control.com. You can learn more about this. This is the pill for pigeons
You know,
and other birds. It's actually
any
allowed for other
yeah,
birds as well, prevents their
any
reproduction.
if you go on any search engine and just type in a little bit of birth control for birds or
Birth control for
conscious
birds, it'll come
that,
up.
or even pigeon control or just about
You're out
anything,
there.
you will find us. And we refer to it affectionately as planned pigeonhood.
Okay, planned pigeon. You heard it here from the CEO. That's great. Well, thank you, Mr. Wolf. I really appreciate your time here today talking to our Living the Wildlife audience about birth control for pigeons or uh, planned
Planned pigeonhood.
pigeon control for pigeons. But it also is of labeled for other birds as well. So we
Oh
want to
yeah.
be sure
Yeah, and
that's
we
out there as
yeah,
well.
we continue to do work in other birds. We have some international work going on now in other birds. So
Yeah, well, I saw the miners. So for those of us those that are out in the Australian area of the world, we do have some people that listen. I know of at least one listening out of Australia. So the minor birds, this is something miners can be quite a hassle for
yeah,
some of those
and
Southeast Asian areas. So
Asian, Middle East, India, parts of Africa are overwhelmed with them.
yeah, so they're quite a bird. Well, we're really glad to have you on board. So everyone you've been listening to, of course, Eric Wolf of Ovo Control or Inalytics LLC. And we've been talking about pigeon birth control and birth control for birds. And so hopefully check it out if you're doing bird work. If your clients are concerned about using lethal control for pigeons for whatever the case may be, this is a product you might want to be able to check out. It's a general use product, but you're going to need to have a license to use it on someone else's property. But at least you can become aware of another tool that can be available for the management of these birds and make yourself some money and satisfy the client at the same time. So definitely check it out. Ovocontrol.com. Well, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. If you have questions, comments, and yes, even criticisms, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. And again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.
There you go. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.